During Totermanavada, they called me defective, and by the age of 19, after 3 doctors had examined my frail body and pronounced their verdict, I began to believe them. My name is Thomas Beaumont Callahan. I am 19 years old, and my body has always been a betrayal. A collection of failures written in bone and muscle that never properly formed. I was born premature in January of 1840, arriving 2 months early during one of the coldest winters Mississippi had seen in decades. My mother, Sarah Beaumont Callahan, went into labor unexpectedly during a dinner party my father was hosting for visiting judges and planters. The midwife who attended her, an enslaved woman named Mama Ruth, who had delivered half the white babies in the county, took one look at me and shook her head. "Judge Callahan," she told my father, "this baby won't make it through the night. He's too small. His breathing is shallow. Best prepare your wife for the loss." But my mother, delirious with fever and exhaustion, refused to accept that prognosis. "He'll live," she whispered, holding my tiny body against her chest. "I know he will. I can feel his heart beating. It's weak, but it's fighting." She was right. I survived that first night, and the next, and the next. But surviving isn't the same as thriving. At 1 month, I weighed barely 6 pounds. At 6 months, I still couldn't hold up my own head. At 1 year, when other babies were standing and some were taking their first steps, I could barely sit upright. The doctors my father brought in from Natchez, from Vicksburg, from as far away as New Orleans, all said the same thing. Premature birth had stunted my development in ways that would affect me for life. My mother died when I was 6 years old, a victim to the yellow fever epidemic that swept through Mississippi in 1846. I remember her lying in bed, her skin the color of old parchment, her eyes yellowed and distant. She called me to her bedside the day before she died. "Thomas," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You're going to face challenges your whole life. People will underestimate you. They'll pity you. They'll dismiss you. But you have something more valuable than physical strength. You have your mind, your heart, your soul. Don't let anyone make you feel less than whole." And she died the next morning. I didn't fully understand her words until years later. My father, Judge William Callahan, was a formidable man in every way I wasn't. 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, with a voice that could silence a courtroom with a single word. He'd built his fortune from nothing. Started as a poor lawyer from Alabama, married into the Beaumont family's modest plantation, and through shrewd investments and strategic land acquisitions, transformed those initial 800 acres into an 8,000-acre cotton empire. Callahan Plantation sat on the high bluffs overlooking the Mississippi River, 15 miles south of Natchez in what was considered the richest soil in the South. The main house was a Greek Revival mansion my father had built in 1835. 2 stories of white-painted brick with massive Doric columns, wide galleries on both levels, and tall windows that caught the river breeze. Inside, crystal chandeliers hung from 15-foot ceilings, imported furniture filled rooms large enough to host balls for 100 guests, and Persian rugs covered floors of polished hard pine. Behind the main house stretched the working plantation, the cotton gin, the blacksmith shop, the carpentry workshop, the smokehouse, the laundry, the kitchen building, the overseer's house, and beyond all that, the quarters, rows of small cabins where 300 enslaved people lived in conditions that contrasted sharply with the mansion's luxury. I grew up in this world of extreme wealth built on extreme brutality, though as a child I didn't understand the full implications. I was tutored at home by a succession of teachers my father hired. I was too frail for the rough and tumble of school, too sickly to board at the academies where other planter sons went. Instead, I learned Greek and Latin, mathematics and literature, history and philosophy in the quiet of my father's library. By age 19, I stood 5 feet 2 inches tall, the height of a boy entering puberty rather than a young man. My frame was slight, weighing perhaps 110 pounds, with bones so delicate that Dr. Harrison once commented I had the skeleton of a bird. My chest caved inward slightly, a condition the doctors called pectus excavatum, the result of ribs that had never properly formed. My hands trembled constantly, a fine tremor that made simple tasks like writing or holding a teacup an exercise in concentration. My eyesight was terrible, requiring thick spectacles that magnified my pale blue eyes to an almost comical size. Without them, the world was a blur. My voice had never fully deepened, remaining in that awkward range between boy and man. My hair was fine and light brown, thinning already despite my youth. My skin was pale, almost translucent, showing every vein beneath the surface. But the worst part, the part that would ultimately define my fate, was my complete lack of masculine development. I had no facial hair to speak of, just a few wispy strands on my upper lip that I shaved more out of hope than necessity. My body was hairless, smooth as a child's, and the doctor's examinations had confirmed what my father had suspected. My reproductive organs were severely underdeveloped, rendering me sterile. The examinations began shortly after my 18th birthday in January of 1858. My father had arranged for me to meet a potential bride, Martha Henderson, daughter of a wealthy planter from Port Gibson. The meeting was a disaster. Martha took one look at me and couldn't hide her disgust. She made polite conversation for exactly 15 minutes before claiming a headache and leaving. I overheard her telling her mother as they departed, "Father can't seriously expect me to marry that child. He looks like he'd break in half on our wedding night." After that humiliation, my father summoned Dr. Harrison. Dr. Samuel Harrison was Natchez' most prominent physician, a Yale-educated man in his 50s who specialized in what he called matters of masculine health and heredity. He arrived at Callahan Plantation on a humid February morning, carrying a leather medical bag and an air of clinical detachment. My father left us alone in his study. Dr. Harrison had me undressed completely, then conducted the most humiliating hour of my life. He measured me, height, weight, chest circumference, limb length. He examined every inch of my body, making notes in a small leather journal. He paid particular attention to my groin, manipulating my underdeveloped testicles, commenting aloud about their size and consistency. "Significantly below normal," he muttered, writing. "Prepubertal in appearance and texture." When he finished, he had me dress and called my father back into the room. "Judge Callahan," Dr. Harrison said, settling into a leather chair. "I'll be direct. Your son's condition is not merely constitutional frailty. He suffers from what we call hypogonadism, a failure of the sexual organs to develop properly. This was likely caused by his premature birth and subsequent developmental delays." My father's face remained impassive. What does this mean for his future? For marriage? For continuation of the family line? Dr. Harrison glanced at me, then back at my father. "Judge, the likelihood of your son producing offspring is virtually non-existent. The testicular tissue is insufficient for spermatogenesis, the production of viable seed. His hormone production is clearly deficient, as evidenced by his lack of secondary sexual characteristics. Even if he were to marry, consummation might prove difficult, and conception would be, in my professional opinion, impossible." The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Impossible. My father was silent for a long moment. "You're absolutely certain?" "As certain as medical science allows. I've seen perhaps a dozen cases like this in my career. None produce children." "I see. Thank you, Dr. Harrison. I'll have your payment sent to your office." After the doctor left, my father poured himself 3 fingers of bourbon and stared out the window at the river. "Father, I'm sorry," I said quietly. He didn't turn around. "For what?" "For being born early. For being sickly. For being," he trailed off, took a long drink. "Not your fault, Thomas, but it is our reality." But my father wasn't satisfied with one opinion. A week later, Dr. Jeremiah Blackwood arrived from Vicksburg. He was younger than Dr. Harrison, more aggressive in his examination, rougher in his handling of my body. But his conclusion was identical: severe hypogonadism with associated sterility. The condition is permanent and untreatable. The third doctor came from New Orleans in March. Dr. Antoine Merrier was a Creole physician who'd studied in Paris and spoke with a thick French accent. He was the gentlest of the three, apologizing for the invasive nature of the examination. But his verdict was the same. Je suis désolé, but your son, he cannot father children. The development, it is arrested. Nothing can be done. 3 doctors, 3 examinations, 3 identical conclusions. Thomas Beaumont Callahan was sterile, unfit for breeding, incapable of continuing the family line. The news spread through Mississippi's planter society with the speed and thoroughness of gossip among people who had nothing better to do than discuss each other's business. My father made no effort to keep it secret. What would be the point? Any woman who agreed to marry me would need to know. Better to be honest up front than face recriminations later. The Hendersons withdrew their daughter from consideration immediately. The Rutherfords, who'd expressed interest in introducing me to their younger daughter, sent a polite note declining. The Prestons, the Montgomerys, the Fairfaxes, all the prominent families who might have overlooked my physical frailty for the sake of the Callahan fortune, all suddenly found reasons why their daughters were unsuitable or already promised elsewhere. But it wasn't just the private rejections that hurt. It was the public comments. I overheard Mrs. Harrison at church in April. Such a pity about the Callahan boy. The judge has all that wealth and no proper heir to leave it to. Makes you wonder what the point is. At a dinner party my father hosted in May, one of the guests, drunk on my father's fine whiskey, said loudly enough for me to hear from the hallway, "It's nature's way, isn't it? The weak ones aren't supposed to reproduce. Keeps the stock healthy." A visiting planter from Louisiana, examining a horse my father was selling, commented, "Fine animal. Strong lines, good conformation, proven stud. Not like that son of yours, eh? Sometimes breeding just fails." Each comment was a knife, but I'd learned to show no reaction. What would be the point? They were right in the terms they understood. I was defective merchandise, a failed investment, a dead-end branch on the family tree. My father withdrew into himself during the spring and summer of 1858. He still ran the plantation with his usual efficiency, still served as county judge, still attended social functions. But at home, he was increasingly distant, spending long hours in his study with bourbon and legal documents, working on something he wouldn't discuss with me. I retreated into books. My father's library contained over 2,000 volumes, and I'd read most of them by age 19. I particularly loved philosophy and poetry. Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Keats, Shelley, Byron. I found solace in words written by men who'd contemplated suffering, mortality, and the human condition. I also began exploring books my father didn't know were in his library, volumes that previous owners had left behind or that had been accidentally included in lots purchased at estate sales. These included abolitionist literature that was technically illegal in Mississippi. Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, published in 1845. Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe, published in 1852. Essays by William Lloyd Garrison and other Northern abolitionists. I read these forbidden books late at night when the house was quiet, and they disturbed me profoundly. I'd grown up accepting slavery as natural, as ordained by God, as beneficial to both master and slave. The idea that enslaved people were inferior, childlike, incapable of self-governance, this was what everyone around me believed and taught. But these books presented a different picture. Frederick Douglass wrote with intelligence and eloquence that matched any white author I'd read. He described the brutality of slavery, the whippings, the family separations, the sexual exploitation, the psychological torture of being treated as property. Uncle Tom's Cabin, despite being fiction, depicted slavery's horrors with devastating emotional impact. I began noticing things I'd previously ignored. The scars on the backs of field hands. The way enslaved people's expressions went blank and subservient when white people approached. The children who looked suspiciously like my father's overseers. The women who disappeared from the fields for months, then returned without the babies they'd obviously carried. But I did nothing with these observations. I was too weak, too dependent, too compromised by my own comfort to challenge the system. I told myself I was different from other slaveholders, that I treated enslaved people with more kindness. But kindness doesn't make slavery less evil. It just makes the enslaver feel better about participating in it. In September of 1858, my father made another attempt at finding me a bride. He contacted families outside Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, Georgia. He lowered his standards, approaching families of lesser wealth and social standing. He offered increasingly generous dowries, guaranteeing that any woman who married me would live in luxury and want for nothing. The responses were variations on a theme. "Thank you for your generous offer, but Caroline is already promised to another. We appreciate your interest, but we don't feel it would be a suitable match. While your son seems a fine young man, we're looking for a situation with different prospects." That last one was particularly cruel. Different prospects was a polite way of saying a husband who can give us grandchildren. By December of 1858, my father had stopped trying. We ate dinner together in silence most nights. The clink of silver on china, the only sound in the massive dining room. Sometimes he'd look at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Disappointment certainly, but also something like desperation. The explosion came in March of 1859. It was late evening, and my father had been drinking more than usual. I was in the library reading Meditations by Marcus Aurelius when he burst in. "Thomas, we need to talk." I set down the book. "Yes, Father." He sat down heavily, bourbon sloshing in his glass. "I'm 58 years old. I could die tomorrow or live another 20 years, but either way, I'll die eventually. And when I do, what happens to all this?" He gestured vaguely at the room, the house, the plantation beyond. "The estate will go to our nearest male relative, I suppose. Cousin Robert in Alabama." Cousin Robert, my father spat, is an incompetent drunk who's lost 2 small plantations to bad debt. He'd sell this place within a year and drink away the profits. Everything I've built, everything my father built before me, would be gone. "I'm sorry, Father. I know this isn't the situation you wanted. Sorry doesn't solve the problem." He stood up, began pacing. "For 18 months, I've tried everything. 18 months of searching for a wife who'd accept you despite your condition. No one will. No one wants a husband who can't produce heirs. That's the reality. I know. So I've had to think creatively. Very creatively about solutions that push the boundaries of convention." Something in his tone made me uneasy. "What do you mean?" He stopped pacing, looked directly at me. "I'm giving you Delilah." I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. "I'm sorry." "What?" "Delilah. The field hand. I'm giving her to you as your companion. Your wife in practical terms." The words made no sense. "Father, you cannot possibly be suggesting." "I'm not suggesting. I'm telling you what's going to happen." His voice was hard now, the voice he used in court when pronouncing sentence. "No white woman will marry you. That's established fact. But the Callahan line needs to continue. The plantation needs heirs, even if those heirs are unconventional." The full horror of what he was proposing hit me. "You want me to, with a slave woman?" "Father, that's, even if I could, which the doctors say I can't, that's not how inheritance works. A child from a slave woman wouldn't be your heir. They'd be property. Unless I free them. Unless I legally adopt them. Unless I structure my will very carefully, which, as a judge and lawyer, I'm uniquely qualified to do. This is insane. This is necessary." He sat down again, leaning forward. "Thomas, listen to me. I've thought this through from every angle. You can't produce children. The doctors were unanimous about that. But children can be produced on your behalf. Delilah is strong, healthy, intelligent. I'll arrange for her to be bred with a suitable male from another plantation. Strong stock, proven fertility, good physical specimens. The children she bears will legally be mine through documentation I'll create. When I die, I'll will them to you along with papers freeing them and establishing them as your adopted heirs. They'll inherit everything. You're talking about breeding human beings like livestock. I'm talking about ensuring the continuation of this family and this plantation. Is it unconventional? Yes. Is it legally complex? Absolutely. But it's possible, and it solves our problem. It's not my problem. I stood up, my hands trembling more than usual. Father, what you're describing is evil. You want to use a woman's body without her consent to produce children who will be manipulated through legal fictions into becoming heirs. You're treating people like breeding stock. Like animals. They are animals in the eyes of the law. His voice rose to match mine. Thomas, I understand you've been reading those abolitionist books. Yes, I know about them. I'm not blind. You filled your head with sentimental nonsense about the humanity of slaves, but the legal reality is that they are property. I own Delilah the same way I own this house or that chair. And I'm choosing to use her in a way that solves a problem. And what does Delilah think about this? She'll do what she's told. She's property. Thomas. Her opinion is irrelevant. Something in me snapped. I'd spent my entire life deferring to my father's authority, accepting his decisions, trying to make up for being a disappointing son, but this was too much. No. The word came out quietly but firmly. My father blinked. What did you say? I said no. I won't be part of this. If you want to implement this obscene breeding scheme, you'll do it without my participation or cooperation. You ungrateful, he stood up, his face reddening. Do you have any idea what I've sacrificed for you? The opportunities I've lost because I had to focus on finding solutions for my defective son. The social embarrassment of having an heir who can't perform the one basic function required of him. I didn't ask to be born this way. And I didn't ask for a son who'd end the family line. He threw his glass, which shattered against the fireplace. I'm trying to find a solution, and you're throwing it back in my face out of some misguided moral superiority you learned from abolitionist propaganda. It's not propaganda to say that people shouldn't be bred like animals. Get out. Get out of my sight. I left the library, my heart pounding, my whole body shaking. I went to my room, closed the door, and sat on my bed, trying to process what had just happened. My father wanted to use an enslaved woman as breeding stock to produce heirs that would legally be manipulated into inheriting his plantation, and he saw nothing wrong with this plan. In fact, he thought it was a clever solution to an intractable problem. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about Delilah, about the life my father was planning for her without her knowledge or consent. I'd seen her around the plantation, of course. She was hard to miss. Delilah was 24 years old, nearly 6 feet tall, with a powerful build from years of field work. She had skin the color of polished mahogany, high cheekbones, and eyes that held an intelligence she'd learned to hide in the presence of white people. She was what the overseers called a prime field hand, strong enough to pick 300 pounds of cotton a day, healthy enough to work through the brutal Mississippi summers without collapsing. I'd heard the overseers talking about her. That Delilah's worth 3 regular hands. Never gets sick, never complains, works like a machine. But I'd also heard darker comments. Shame to waste breeding potential like that on field work. A woman built like that should be having babies every year. Now my father wanted to ensure that breeding potential was exploited. I couldn't let that happen. But what could I do? I had no authority over the plantation. I was 19 years old, physically weak, financially dependent on my father. I couldn't free Delilah. I didn't own her. And even if I did, the legal process was complex and expensive. I couldn't help her escape. I barely knew her. I had no connections to the Underground Railroad and wouldn't know the first thing about arranging escape for a fugitive slave. But I couldn't do nothing. The next morning, still shaking from the confrontation and lack of sleep, I made a decision. I needed to warn Delilah, at minimum. She deserved to know what my father was planning. The quarters were located a quarter-mile behind the main house down a dirt path lined with ancient oak trees. I'd rarely visited them before. It wasn't proper for the master's son to mingle with the enslaved. The few times I'd been there were during Christmas distributions, when my father would hand out extra rations and cheap gifts to the people who made his wealth possible. The quarters consisted of 20 small cabins arranged in 2 rows. Each cabin housed between 6 and 10 people in conditions that contrasted sharply with the mansion's luxury. Rough pine plank walls, dirt floors, a single fireplace for heating and cooking, 1 or 2 small windows with wooden shutters but no glass. It was mid-morning on a Tuesday, which meant most of the field hands were out working. Only a few people were around, an elderly woman tending a cook fire, some children too young to work, a man with a bandaged leg sitting on a cabin step. They all stared at me as I walked past. It wasn't common for white people to visit the quarters, except the overseer on his rounds or my father on inspection tours. A frail young white man in fine clothes walking alone through the quarters, I must have looked completely out of place. I asked the elderly woman which cabin belonged to Delilah. She looked at me suspiciously. "Why you asking after Delilah, young master? I need to speak with her. It's important. She out in the fields. Won't be back till sundown." "I'll wait." The woman's eyes narrowed, but she pointed to the 3rd cabin in the 2nd row. "That's hers. But I don't know what business you got with her." I spent the day in uncomfortable limbo. I couldn't return to the main house. My father and I weren't speaking. I couldn't wait in Delilah's cabin. That would be completely inappropriate. So I walked the grounds of the plantation, avoiding the areas where my father might be, trying to formulate what I'd say to Delilah when she returned. The sun was setting when I saw the field hands returning. They walked in loose groups, exhausted from 10 hours of labor under the March sun. Delilah was easy to spot. She was a head taller than most of the others, walking with a straight-backed posture despite obvious fatigue. She saw me standing near her cabin and stopped. "Master Thomas." The other field hands stared, whispering to each other. This was highly unusual, the master's son waiting at a slave cabin. "Delilah, I need to speak with you. It's important." "May I?" I gestured toward her cabin. She glanced at the other workers, then nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." We entered the cabin. It was a single room, about 12 by 14 feet, with a dirt floor and rough plank walls. A fireplace occupied one wall, cold now in the mild evening. 3 rough wooden pallets served as beds. Delilah shared the cabin with 2 other women who worked in the laundry. There was a crude table, 2 stools, a few cooking pots, and some clothing hanging from pegs on the wall. This was where 3 human beings lived. The contrast between this and my bedroom in the mansion, with its 4-poster bed, imported furniture, soft carpets, and walls lined with bookshelves, was staggering. Delilah stood uncertainly in the middle of the room. "Is something wrong, Master Thomas?" "Where to begin? How do you tell someone that your father is planning to use her as breeding stock?" "Delilah, I need to tell you something my father is planning. Something that involves you." Her expression became carefully neutral, the look enslaved people adopted when dealing with white people who might mean danger. "Yes, sir." I told her everything, about my sterility, about my father's desperation for heirs, about his plan to breed her with a male slave from another plantation, about the legal machinations that would turn her children into my adopted heirs. As I spoke, I watched her face cycle through shock, horror, and then a kind of weary resignation. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Finally, she said, "So the judge plans to use me like a broodmare?" "Yes. And I wanted you to know. I wanted to warn you so you could. I don't know. Prepare yourself. Resist if possible. Though I know that's almost impossible given your situation." "Why?" She looked at me directly now, fear temporarily overcome by curiosity. "Why are you telling me this, Master Thomas? Why do you care what happens to me?" It was a fair question. Why did I care? I'd lived my entire life benefiting from slavery without questioning it. I'd worn clothes made by enslaved people, eaten food prepared by enslaved people, lived in luxury built on enslaved labor. What made this different? Because what my father is planning is wrong. Not just morally wrong in some abstract sense, but practically, specifically wrong in a way I can't ignore anymore. "You think slavery's wrong?" There was skepticism in her voice. "I think." I struggled for words. "I think I've been reading too much lately. Books that make me question things I've always accepted. And when my father laid out his plan, when he talked about you like you were livestock to be bred for his purposes, something in me couldn't accept it. But you still own slaves. Your father still owns me." "Yes. And I don't have an answer for that contradiction. I'm complicit in a system I'm starting to understand is evil. But I couldn't let my father's plan happen without at least warning you." Delilah sat down on one of the stools, suddenly looking exhausted. "Master Thomas, I appreciate the warning. Truly. But what am I supposed to do with this information? I can't refuse. If the judge orders me bred, I'll be bred. If I resist, I'll be whipped until I comply, or sold to someone worse, or killed. There is no escape from this. There might be." The words were out before I'd fully thought them through. She looked up. "What?" "There might be a way out. I've been thinking about it all day. If you were to escape." "Escape to where?" "We're in Mississippi. There are slave patrols everywhere. I have no papers, no money, no knowledge of the roads north. And I'm a 6-foot-tall black woman. I'm not exactly inconspicuous. I'd be caught within a day and sold south, probably to a Louisiana sugar plantation where I'd be worked to death within a few years. What if you had papers? What if you had money? What if you had someone to travel with who could deflect suspicion?" She stared at me. "Master Thomas, what are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting." I took a deep breath. "I'm suggesting that maybe we both leave together. We go north. I have money. My mother left me a trust fund that I can access. Not a fortune, but enough to get us started somewhere. I can forge travel passes in my father's handwriting. We take a wagon and supplies and we just go. You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious. Master Thomas, if we're caught, do you know what would happen? You'd be imprisoned for slave theft. I'd be killed. They don't just whip runaway slaves in Mississippi. They make examples of them. Public hanging. Sometimes worse. I know. But if we succeed, and if we somehow make it north, then what? You'd be throwing away everything. Your inheritance, your social position, your family name. You'd be poor. You'd be an outcast. And for what? To help one slave escape when your father owns 300. It was the fundamental question. And I didn't have a good answer except the truth. Because I can't save 300 people. But maybe I can save one. Maybe I can stop one evil thing from happening. And maybe that's better than doing nothing. Why me? You don't even know me. Because you're the one my father's planning to hurt. Because I can't stop him from continuing slavery, but I can try to stop him from breeding you like an animal. And because I hesitated. Because I think maybe we both need to escape. You from slavery. Me from a life of complicity in a system I'm starting to realize I can't morally accept. Delilah studied me with those intelligent eyes that had been trained to hide their intelligence. You really mean this? Yes. You'd give up everything to help me escape? Yes. Even though you barely know me. Even though I'm just one slave among millions. Even though it might not make any real difference in the grand scheme. Yes. Because it would make a difference to you. And right now, that feels like the only thing I can actually control. She was quiet for a long time. Outside, I could hear other enslaved people moving around, preparing evening meals, settling in for the night. The sun had fully set now, and the cabin was lit only by faint moonlight through the window. Finally, Delilah said, if we do this, and I'm not saying yes yet, I'm just saying if, we'd need to be smart about it. We'd need to plan carefully. The judge has connections everywhere in Mississippi. He'd send people after us. I know. And we'd need to move fast. If he's planning to bring in a male slave to breed me with, that could happen any day. When would you want to leave? Give me 2 days. To think about it. To prepare what little I have. To say goodbye to people in a way that doesn't alert suspicion. She stood up. Master Thomas, I don't fully understand why you're doing this. Part of me thinks this is some kind of trap or cruel joke. But if you're sincere, if you really mean to help me escape, then I'll take that chance. Because you're right. What your father's planning is worse than the risk of running. I'm sincere. I swear it. Then we leave in 2 days. Thursday night, after everyone's asleep. Meet me at the stable at midnight. Bring money, supplies, and those forged travel passes. I'll bring what little I have. I nodded. Thursday night. Midnight. She walked to the cabin door, opened it, then turned back. Master Thomas. Thomas. If we do this, if we make it north, what then? What do you expect from me? Nothing. I expect nothing except that you'd be free. What you do with that freedom is entirely your choice. You're not doing this expecting me to be grateful in certain ways. Expecting me to be your mistress or companion or, no. Absolutely not. I'm doing this because it's right, or at least less wrong than doing nothing. That's all. She studied me for another moment, then nodded. Thursday night. Don't be late, and don't change your mind. I left the quarters and walked back to the mansion in the dark, my heart pounding. What had I just agreed to? I was planning to steal my father's property, because that's what Delilah was in the eyes of the law, property, and flee north with her. If we were caught, I'd be imprisoned. Delilah would likely be killed. But if we succeeded, one person would be free. One woman wouldn't be forced into the breeding scheme my father had planned. It wasn't saving the world. It wasn't ending slavery. But it was something. The next 2 days were agony. I avoided my father as much as possible, taking meals in my room, claiming illness. He didn't push the issue. We were still angry with each other, and he likely assumed I needed time to come around to his plan. I used those 2 days to prepare. I went to the bank in Natchez and withdrew nearly all of my trust fund, $800, a substantial sum. I packed a bag with clothes, books, and necessities. I studied maps of Mississippi and the roads north. I practiced my father's signature on travel passes, getting the loops and flourishes exactly right. I also wrote letters. One to my father explaining why I was leaving. One to Dr. Harrison thanking him for his professional care. One to the few friends I'd had over the years saying goodbye. The letter to my father was the hardest. Father, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I'm leaving Mississippi and I won't be returning. I know this will anger you, disappoint you, and perhaps hurt you. For that, I'm sorry, but I cannot be part of your plan for Delilah. I cannot participate in a scheme that treats human beings as breeding stock. You raised me to value education, reason, and moral principle. The education you provided has led me to conclusions you won't like. Slavery is evil and our participation in it is wrong. I'm not asking you to understand or approve. I'm simply telling you that I've made my choice. The Callahan line may end with me, but it will end with whatever dignity I can salvage rather than continue through the moral bankruptcy of your breeding scheme. I hope someday you'll understand. Your son, Thomas. I sealed the letter and left it on my desk. Thursday night arrived. I couldn't eat dinner. I lay in bed, fully clothed, listening to the house settle into sleep. My father retired to his room around 10 o'clock. The servants finished their evening duties by 11 o'clock. By 11:30, the mansion was silent. At 11:45, I grabbed my bag, crept downstairs, and slipped out through the kitchen door. The stable was dark, lit only by moonlight filtering through gaps in the walls. I hitched up one of the smaller wagons, a two-horse rig that we used for local travel. I loaded my bag, some food I'd stolen from the kitchen, blankets, and a canteen of water. At exactly midnight, Delilah appeared. She carried a small bundle, everything she owned in the world, probably. Some clothes, maybe a few personal items. That was it. 24 years of life reduced to one small bundle. You came, she said quietly. Did you think I wouldn't? I wasn't sure. Part of me thought this was all a dream or a trick. It's neither. Are you ready? She looked back at the quarters, visible in the distance. As ready as I'll ever be. We climbed into the wagon. I took the reins. I'd driven wagons before, though not often. Delilah sat beside me, her bundle in her lap. Where are we going? She asked as we started moving. Northeast to start. We'll avoid Natchez. Too many people who know me. We'll head toward Vicksburg, then into Tennessee. From there, we'll work our way to Ohio. Cincinnati has a large free black community. We can disappear there. That's at least 400 miles. Closer to 500. It'll take us 2 weeks, maybe more. We'll travel mostly at night, rest during the day in wooded areas off the main roads. You've thought this through. I had 2 days. I did my best. We rode in silence for a while. The plantation fell away behind us, and soon we were on the main road heading northeast. The night was clear, the moon bright enough to see by. Every sound made my heart race. Was that a patrol? Was that someone following us? But it was just wind, animals, the normal sounds of a Mississippi night. After an hour, Delilah spoke again. Thomas. Can I call you Thomas? Of course. We're not master and slave anymore. We're just 2 people trying to get north. Thomas, I need to ask you something honestly. Why are you really doing this? And I don't want the noble answer about stopping one evil. I want the real reason. I thought about that as the horses plodded on. The real reason. I think I've spent my entire life being told I'm defective. That I'm less than a real man because my body doesn't work right. That I'm worthless because I can't produce heirs. And I've internalized that. I've believed it. I don't see what that has to do with helping me. My father's plan would have used you the same way society has used me, reduced you to your reproductive function, treated you as valuable only for what you could produce. And I realized I couldn't participate in doing to someone else what's been done to me. Does that make sense? Yes, she said quietly. It makes perfect sense. We traveled through the night and into the dawn. As the sun rose, we pulled off the road into a grove of trees. I unhitched the horses and let them graze. Delilah and I ate some of the food I'd brought. Bread, cheese, dried meat. We should sleep in shifts, Delilah said. Take turns keeping watch in case anyone comes. You should sleep first. You worked all day yesterday. All right. Wake me in a few hours. She lay down on a blanket and was asleep almost instantly. I watched her for a moment, this woman I barely knew, who I was risking everything to help escape. She looked younger in sleep, less guarded. The intelligence she normally hid was visible in the peaceful lines of her face. What had I done? I'd thrown away my entire life on an impulse to save one person from one specific evil. It was irrational, possibly foolish, definitely dangerous. But it was also the first time in my life I'd felt like I was actually doing something that mattered. Over the next 13 days, we made our way slowly north. We traveled at night, slept during the day, avoided towns where possible. I used the forged travel passes 3 times when we were stopped by patrols or passed through checkpoints. Each time, my heart raced as the patrol officer examined the documents. Says here you're traveling on Judge Callahan's business, escorting his property to Vicksburg for sale. That's correct, officer. The judge needs to liquidate some assets, and Delilah here is prime stock. Should fetch a good price. MHM. And why is the judge's son doing this instead of an overseer? Father wanted me to learn the business. Can't run a plantation if you don't understand all aspects of it. The officer would hand back the papers, wave us through. Each time, I'd keep my face calm until we were out of sight, then nearly collapse with relief. Delilah was remarkable during the journey. She was stronger than me, more capable, more resourceful. When a wheel came loose, she fixed it. When we needed to ford a stream, she waded in first to check the depth. When we ran low on food, she knew which plants were edible and how to set snares for rabbits. Where did you learn all this? I asked one night as we ate rabbit she'd caught and cooked. You learn things when you're enslaved. You pay attention to everything because knowledge might be the difference between surviving and dying. I watched the men fix wagons. I learned plants from women who gathered herbs. I learned to hunt for my father before he was sold away when I was 10. I'm sorry about your father. Don't be sorry. Just keep moving north. We talked during those long nights of travel. Really talked, in ways I'd never talked to anyone. Delilah told me about her life. Born on a plantation in Alabama. Sold to my father when she was 15. 9 years of field work that should have broken her but didn't. She told me about dreams of freedom she'd barely allowed herself to have. About the constant vigilance required to survive slavery, about watching friends sold away, sisters raped by overseers, mothers separated from children. I told her about my life. The isolation of being sickly and strange. The education that set me apart. The loneliness of having wealth but no real friends. The shame of being called defective. The growing realization that my comfortable life was built on others' suffering. You're not defective, she said one night. You're different. There's a distinction. Society doesn't see it that way. Society's wrong about a lot of things. Wrong about slavery, wrong about women, wrong about you. By the time we crossed into Tennessee, something had shifted between us. We weren't master and former slave anymore. We weren't even just traveling companions. We were 2 people who'd begun to genuinely care about each other. It was Delilah who first voiced it. We'd stopped to rest in a barn we'd found abandoned. It was raining hard outside, and we decided to wait out the storm. Thomas, can I ask you something personal? Of course. When we get north, when I'm free, what happens then? Between us. I mean, I've been thinking about the same question. I don't know. I suppose we'll find you a place to live, help you get settled, find you work. Maybe I'll stay nearby in case you need help. But you'll be free to make your own choices. What if? She hesitated. What if my choice is to stay with you? My heart skipped. Delilah, you don't owe me anything. I didn't help you escape expecting, I know that. But what if it's not about owing? What if it's about wanting? I don't understand. She moved closer. Thomas, over these past 2 weeks, I've gotten to know you. Really know you. Not as Master Thomas, not as the judge's defective son, but as Thomas, the person. And that person is kind, and intelligent, and brave in ways he doesn't even recognize. I'm not brave. I'm weak and sickly. And you gave up everything to help me. You risked imprisonment and death. You're traveling through hostile territory to bring me to freedom. That's not weakness. That's courage. Delilah, even if you feel this way now, you might feel differently when you have real freedom. When you can make choices without desperation or gratitude clouding your judgment. Then let me make this choice now, as clearly and freely as I can. She took my hand. When we get north, I want to stay with you. Not as your property, not as your servant, not out of obligation, but as your partner. Your companion. Maybe even. She hesitated. Maybe even more than that, if you'd want it. You can't want that. I'm sterile. I can't give you children. I can barely give you physical affection. My body is so weak and underdeveloped that I don't even know if I could. Thomas, stop. I don't care about children. I don't care about your body. I care about you. The person who reads philosophy and treats me like an equal. Who listens when I talk. Who sees me as human. That's what I want. People will judge us. A white man and a black woman together. It's illegal in most places. Even in the North, we'll face prejudice. I've faced prejudice my whole life. At least this way, I'd face it with someone I choose to be with rather than someone who owns me. I looked at her, this strong, intelligent, beautiful woman who somehow, impossibly, seemed to want to be with me. Are you sure? I'm sure. We kissed there in that abandoned barn, rain drumming on the roof. Two people from completely different worlds finding something neither had expected to find. We reached Cincinnati in early June, having traveled for nearly 2 months. The city was bustling, crowded, full of free black people and abolitionists and escaped slaves building new lives. I used some of my remaining money to rent a small house in a neighborhood where interracial couples, while uncommon, weren't unheard of. We presented ourselves as husband and wife. Thomas and Delilah Freeman. Freeman because Delilah had no last name as a slave, and she chose that one for its obvious symbolism. The first few months were hard. Money was tight. I found work as a clerk in a law office. My education and neat handwriting were valuable skills. Delilah found work as a seamstress, and her strong hands that had picked cotton now created beautiful clothes. People stared at us. Some assumed Delilah was my property. Others assumed she was my mistress. A few understood we were actually married. And their reactions ranged from disapproval to acceptance. But we built a life, a real life based on choice rather than ownership. In November of 1859, we married. Legally, or as legally as possible for an interracial couple. A Quaker minister who didn't care about racial boundaries performed the ceremony in a small church. It wasn't recognized by most authorities, but it felt real to us. I take you, Delilah Freeman, to be my wife, I said, my voice trembling. I take you, Thomas Callahan Freeman, to be my husband, she responded, adding my name to hers. We were truly married now, two people who'd escaped impossible situations and found love in the ruins. The war came in 1861. Neither of us could fight. I was too weak, and women didn't serve. but we contributed in other ways. Our home became a stop on the Underground Railroad. Delilah, using her knowledge and experience of slavery, helped newly escaped people adapt to freedom. I used my legal knowledge to help free black people navigate complex documentation requirements. We met Frederick Douglass once when he came to Cincinnati to speak. After his lecture, we approached him, and Delilah told him our story. He listened intently, then smiled. "You've both taken your freedom in different ways. Mrs. Freeman, you've taken it from a system that tried to own you. Mr. Freeman, you've taken it from a system that tried to define you by your physical limitations. Both of you have proven that freedom is about choice, not circumstance." It was one of the proudest moments of my life. We never had biological children. My sterility was real and permanent. But in 1865, after the war ended, we adopted 3 children, formerly enslaved children whose parents had died or disappeared during the chaos. We named them carefully. Sarah, after my mother. Frederick, after Douglass. And Liberty, because that's what they represented. We raised them in freedom, taught them to read and write, sent them to schools that accepted black children. We taught them they were valuable, that their worth wasn't determined by society's prejudices, but by their own character and choices. Sarah became a teacher, educating freed slaves in reading and mathematics. Frederick became a doctor, serving Cincinnati's black community. Liberty became a lawyer who fought for civil rights, using the law to tear down the same structures that had once enslaved her mother. I lived longer than anyone expected. The doctors who'd examined me at 19 and pronounced me unfit for breeding had predicted I wouldn't live past 30. But I made it to 42. 23 years with Delilah. 23 years of a life I'd built through choice rather than circumstance. I died in 1882 of pneumonia, the same illness that had killed my mother. Delilah held my hand as I slipped away. "Did I do right?" I whispered, barely audible. "Leaving everything, bringing you north. Was it worth it?" Tears streamed down her face. "Thomas, you gave me freedom. You gave me dignity. You gave me love. You gave me a life where I'm a person, not property. You gave me children who will grow up free. Yes, it was worth everything. I love you, Delilah Freeman. I love you, Thomas Freeman." Those were my last words. Delilah lived another 18 years, dying in 1900 at age 65. She spent those years working for civil rights, using her voice to tell the story of slavery and freedom, teaching young people about the importance of choosing justice over comfort. We're buried together in Spring Grove Cemetery in Cincinnati under a shared headstone that reads, Thomas Beaumont Callahan Freeman, 1840 to 1882, and Delilah Freeman, 1835 to 1900, married 1859. They chose freedom over comfort, love over convention, and proved that human worth cannot be determined by physical ability or social status. Our 3 children all lived successful lives of service. Sarah's school educated over 1,000 freed slaves. Frederick's medical practice served Cincinnati's black community for 40 years. Liberty's legal work helped dismantle segregation laws and protect civil rights. In 1920, Liberty published a book titled From Property to Partnership, the story of Thomas and Delilah Freeman. It told our story, the white man society called unfit for breeding and the enslaved woman society called property, and how we both found freedom and love by rejecting the labels others put on us. This is the story of Thomas Beaumont Callahan Freeman and Delilah Freeman, who left Mississippi in May of 1859 and built a life in Cincinnati, Ohio. It's the story of a men's society called defective and a woman's society called property, who proved that human worth isn't determined by physical capability or legal status, but by the choices we make and the dignity we afford ourselves and others. Historical records document our existence. Thomas's birth in 1840, his medical examinations in 1858, and the trust fund withdrawals in 1859. Delilah's sale to Judge Callahan is recorded in plantation ledgers from 1850. Cincinnati city directories list Thomas Freeman as a law clerk from 1859 to 1882 and Delilah Freeman as a seamstress from 1859 to 1900. Our marriage, while not recognized by state law, was recorded by the Quaker meeting house that performed the ceremony. Our children's birth records and adoption papers survive in Cincinnati archives. Our gravestone remains in Spring Grove Cemetery, visited occasionally by descendants and historians interested in unconventional stories of freedom and love from the slavery era. The story challenges assumptions about disability, race, and worth. Thomas wasn't broken because his body didn't develop normally. He was intelligent, moral, and capable of profound courage. Delilah wasn't property, despite the law saying she was. She was strong, intelligent, and deserving of freedom and self-determination. And Judge Callahan's plan, meant to ensure his legacy, instead catalyzed something more valuable, two people finding freedom and building lives based on choice, dignity, and love. If Thomas and Delilah's story moves you, if you believe human worth transcends physical ability and legal status, if you believe love and freedom can triumph even in the darkest times, then share this story. Remember that history is filled with people who defied impossible odds, who chose justice over comfort, who proved that labels don't define us. Our choices do. Their legacy lives on in descendants who continue working for justice, in the example they set of choosing morality over convenience, and in the reminder that every person deserves freedom, dignity, and the chance to write their own story.